Hello and welcome to episode of the Bubbs on Sports podcast. Today is Thursday, August 24th. Hope you had some good days so far and had a good rest of their day yesterday. We've got a lot to get into today on a Thursday program, talking all things New York sports. We'll start with some football today with two big stories for the New York Jets, and we'll also get into a little bit of New York Giants news as well. Corey Davis, unexpected retirement yesterday. We'll start with that. Very shocking, surprising news. We'll start with that today. We'll also get to the Giants trading a 7th-round pick for former first-round pick, trading a 7th-round pick for a former first-round pick in Isaiah Simmons, linebacker, as the New York Giants acquire him from the Arizona Cardinals. So we'll get to that as well. I want to get to a little bit of hockey as well later on. Lafreniere extended 2-year deal worth up to $4.65 million. We'll get to the AAV. We'll get to what he's done. And what does this mean for Lafreniere and the New York Rangers moving forward? So we'll get to that later on. Baseball as well. Yankees finish up a 3-game set this afternoon at Yankee Stadium. As for the Mets, they get a much-needed day off after losing the final 2 games of the 3-game set against the Braves. So they lose 2 of 3, get a day off before facing the Angels, who have had some really tough luck with injuries. Mike Trout back on the IL, and Shohei Ohtani has a torn UCL. So there's a really likely chance that his free agency process gets a lot more interesting now with the potential of him not being able to pitch next season if he needs surgery, and if he gets to a point, or if he needs surgery and he needs to miss next year. So interesting news there. Unfortunate news for Shohei Ohtani. So we'll get to the Mets, or we'll get to the Yankees rather, because the Mets have a day off. Got crushed last night. The whole, you had some Mets fans reacting like they were going to make the playoffs. So this is a little bit of a renaissance. They're turning things around. They end up losing 2 straight games after beating the Braves in Game 1. And the Yankees obviously go for the series win today. Can you win a series? I mean, if you're the Yankees, find a way to win a series. Excellent night last night by Aaron Judge. 3 home runs. Goes from his 24 home run tally, boosts it up to 27. Continues to be the best player for the New York Yankees. But can you win a series today? Can you go out there? Michael King's the opener versus Patrick Corbin of the Nationals, who comes in with a 4.71 ERA. Michael King with a 3.26 ERA. Can you find a way to go out there today and just win the series? Win the series, get your first series or your second series win since July, and have a series win against a team other than the Kansas City Royals and the Oakland A's. Can you do that today for the Yankees? Is it possible? Is it possible that the Yankees could do that today? We'll see. We'll see if they can go out there and get a series victory today and soften what has been such a disappointing recent stretch of games, if they can find a way to take 2 of 3. So we'll get to that later on as well, as we get you set up for that game today, which is starting very soon, by the way. But we'll start today with football. Then we'll move on to a little bit of hockey, because October is approaching, and that means hockey is approaching, and that means October baseball is approaching. It also means football will be in full swing. Football is officially 2 weeks from today. We will have Lions-Chiefs on Thursday Night Football, getting things set up for the 2023 NFL regular season. The excitement is in the air. You can smell football. It is right around the corner. So we'll start today with football, talking a little Jets and a little Giants. We'll get to the Giants here in a little bit, but a very surprising, unexpected news came across as a Jet fan yesterday, as we got word that Corey Davis, at the age of 28, is retiring from the NFL. Now, this is very surprising. He's been on personal leave for a little while now. He dealt with an illness earlier in camp, missed OTAs for personal reasons, and has missed the last couple weeks of camp due to personal reasons. And he came out yesterday, announced his retirement. He told the team on Tuesday night that he was going to retire. Officially came out yesterday and publicly announced that he was going to retire. So you heard from many reports. The Jets officially confirmed it. You got statements from Robert Saleh, Woody Johnson, and Joe Douglas. So an unfortunate turn of events for the Jets in terms of seeing Corey Davis move on from the game, seeing him retire, spent his first 4 years of his NFL career in Tennessee. The last 2 seasons with the New York Jets, he was entering the final year of a 3-year contract. And look, I don't want to speculate the reasons. All you can do is hope everything's okay with Corey Davis and his family, and all you can do is wish him nothing but the best moving forward in whatever he decides to do moving forward. And obviously outside of football, you wish him nothing but the best. But for the New York Jets now, from a New York Jets perspective, it gets interesting now because now you're looking at a roster where you went into training camp with your 4 receivers as Mecole Hardman, Allen Lazard, Garrett Wilson, Randall Cobb, and your 5th was Corey Davis. Or Corey Davis was more your 4th receiver. Randall Cobb was your 5th. Now everyone jumps up a peg. Now Cobb is currently slated as the 4th receiver, and your 5th receiver spot and your 6th receiver spot now becomes open because you don't have Corey Davis. And if the Jets were going to hold on to 6 receivers all along, then they would have to bring in somebody else, whether that's Xavier Gipson or Jason Brownlee. And that's the funny thing about this all is we've been talking all training camp about the 6th receiver competition. The day Denzel Mims got traded, we've been talking about, trading for, or the 6th receiver competition. Who's it going to be? Is it going to be Jerome Cap? Is it Irv Charles, Jason Brownlee, Xavier Gipson? I think mostly it's been a battle between Xavier Gipson and Jason Brownlee has been the 2 front runners, especially recently with them playing well last Saturday night against Tampa. We'll see what they can do this Saturday against the New York Giants, but time's running out. This is the last day of training camp for the New York Jets because there's a day off tomorrow, and then you got the game on Saturday and cuts on Tuesday. You got a couple days of work, and then after that, it's Bills week. Football season is literally right around the corner. September is literally almost here, and it's crazy to think that, considering it feels like just yesterday we were celebrating 4th of July, but here we are. It's August 24th, so things get interesting now for the Jets. But I want to just say this first, because I'll give you some plans and give you some possible things that the New York Jets can do with their receiver room, and we'll see what route Joe Douglas, Robert Saleh in the front office wants to take. But I'll start with this. If you're a New York Jets fan today, and you're getting up and you're extremely worried about this receiving core, I'm here to tell you to calm down. It's not the end of the world. You still have to have trust in this receiving room that's currently constructed. I don't think it's time to panic if you're a New York Jets fan. Now, I will tell you this. The New York Jets, I do think, should go out and either bring in a veteran, potentially make a trade if they do feel there's needs for a veteran there, but I wouldn't be against just keeping it in-house, and maybe you make Gipson and Brownlee both a part of the roster as your 5th and 6th receiver. Obviously, Gipson also being able to return kicks and punts. We saw that against Tampa with the 31-yard punt return that he had. So I'm here to tell you, do not panic if you're a New York Jets fan. This isn't anything against Corey Davis, but let's be real here. Corey Davis was a solid receiver. He wasn't anything special in his 2 years with the Jets. He had tough times sometimes staying on the field. He made some really big catches. I saw a highlight today of that Mike White play on 4th down and 10 against the Vikings. He's made some big plays. He was a good leader, really good guy on and off the field. But let's not act like Corey Davis was a first-team All-Pro and a Pro Bowler in each of the past 2 seasons with the New York Jets. It's not like Corey Davis was our number 1 receiver going into this year. He was our 4th to 5th option. So losing your 4th to 5th best receiver, I don't think is necessarily the end of the world if you're a New York Jets fan. So I am here to tell you to calm down with that. I've seen a lot of overreactions today saying the Jets receiving room isn't any good because Corey Davis is now gone. Again, I like Corey Davis a lot, and you wish him nothing but the best. And I'm not trying to be mean or negative, but he wasn't an all-pro. He wasn't the best receiver in this room. It's not like it's Garrett Wilson who's now missing. You've still got Garrett Wilson. You've still got Allen Lazard. You've still got Mecole Hardman. You've got a veteran Randall Cobb. I understand maybe the other, outside of Garrett Wilson, maybe those names don't pop off the page, but 2 guys have familiarity with Rodgers, and Mecole Hardman was on his way to putting up a career year last year before he was getting hurt. So let's stop acting like this receiving core is all of a sudden a group of just 4 non-good, competent receivers, or outside of Garrett Wilson, it's 3 guys that aren't going to contribute at all. Let's just stop acting like that because that's not true. Now, as I mentioned, they are 1 injury away from being thin, extremely thin. And that's why you do bring up the possibility of bringing in a veteran free agent to solidify or to take Corey Davis' spot. And then one of Xavier Gipson or Jason Brownlee makes the roster as your 6th receiver, and you kind of go about as planned. But let's be honest here. That's not a knock on the Jets. Any team that loses 2 receivers that were going to play a role in the offense. If the Jets get one more if the Jets have an injury, they are very thin. But any team that would have 2 injuries to one of their top 2, backtrack for a second. I got to word this the right way. But if any team has injuries to 2 of their top 5 receivers, they're going to be thin at the position. Not just the Jets. That's any team in football. If the Bills, I'm just using them as an example because their receiving core I probably know the most about in the division. But let's say the Bills, and again, you don't want to wish bad on anybody. I'm not trying to use them as a negative example, but let's say Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis weren't going to be out there for the first start of the season. Just using those 2 guys as example, they're in the division, right? Let's just say that happens. Well, that's bad. I know it's a little different with the Jets, but that's 2 of their top receivers. If any team would lose 2 receivers, you look at the Giants, I don't know, using 2 guys. If they were to lose, let's just say Paris Campbell and Isaiah Hodgins, just using 2 guys, wouldn't be able to start the regular season. They would be a little bit thin at receiver because those are some of their top guys. I'm just using that as an example. Again, I'm not trying to, you never want to see injuries. You never want to see any of these guys, unfortunately have to retire early. None of that. I'm just using those as examples. Any team that would lose 2 of their top 5 receivers would be in a tough spot. That's not a knock on the Jets receiving core. That's just the way it is. So that's why you could potentially go out and add a veteran. Who might that veteran be? Well, again, I will break it down. I don't foresee a situation with the New York Jets where they go out and trade for Davante Adams. As much as I would love for that to happen, believe me, I want to make this clear. If the New York Jets right now traded for Davante Adams, I would be ecstatic. And you would solidify as the most dangerous offensive football. Having Davante Adams, Garrett Wilson with Aaron Rodgers, that's dominant. You have two potentially top 5 receiving yard receiver, top 5 guys that could be. I think Garrett Wilson could definitely enter the top 7 of receiving yards this year. Davante Adams has been up there for his entire NFL career. If you do that, that's dominant. You have the potential to have 2 top 5 receivers on opposite sides of the field. That is so dominant. So believe me, Davante Adams would be great. I don't think it's going to happen. You're less than 3 weeks to go to the start of the start of the Jets season. You have 2 weeks from today is the start of Lions-Chiefs start of the regular season, right? 2 weeks this Sunday will be the first Sunday of football. 2 weeks this Monday will be Jets-Bills. So I don't think a trade of that magnitude is going down, nor do I see a Raiders or a Bucks giving up Mike Evans wanting to do that before the season. I see it most likely happening at the deadline or in the offseason. That's where I see it most likely happening, is either at the trade deadline or next offseason. Because both teams, I think, are going to be a train wreck, both the Raiders and the Bucks. And they're going to probably want to sell either at the deadline or in the offseason. That's where Mike Evans and Davante Adams become available. I don't think they're available right now. I guess it can't hurt to give the Raiders a call. I just don't think the Jets are going to make that magnitude of a move this close. That's a move that is going to take a lot of discussions. The Raiders are going to want a lot in return. The Bucks are going to want a lot in return. Those are moves that are not made in a couple days. Those are moves that take a lot of discussions and a lot of time to make. And it's not a move that's going to get done with less than 3 weeks to go in the until the regular season. So that's a pipe dream at this moment. Is it crazy to say that happens at the deadline? No, I don't think that's crazy at all. But right now, it's not happening. So realistically, again, the Jets could either keep in-house and promote Xavier Gibson and Jason Brownlee and roll with them, or they could look at some free agents. Now, I'll make this clear. When you look, the free agent market right now isn't the best because, let's be honest here, it is August 24th. There's not many big-name receivers that are still available. So the free agent market, you're not going to pick up a big-time game changer. It's not like this is the beginning of the offseason where you could pick up, a big-time free agent wide receiver. It's not like, again, they already got Allen Lazard, who is one of the bigger free agents out there. It's not like you can go out and get a DeAndre Hopkins still available. And it does make sense when, you look back on it. You wonder if the Jets kind of knew maybe something like this was happening because they did go out and get Odell. Hindsight's always 20/20. You wish they went out and got Odell now because you wouldn't have to worry about your 5th and 6th receiver at this point, but it's where you stand. So 2 guys off the top. When you look at Spot Track, right? Spot Track, they got all their free agent receivers left. The 2 guys at the top, Kenny Golladay and Julio Jones, I don't even want to hear anything about those guys. Julio Jones is washed up. He's 34 years old. Kenny Golladay was a disaster with the New York Giants. Bringing him back, the media around that move would be, abysmal. Do not shy away from bringing in a Julio Jones or a Kenny Golladay. Both Julio Jones is washed. Kenny Galladay's not any good. So that's that. 2 guys that I've been looking at, 2 realistic choices, is Jarvis Landry and Sammy Watkins. Now, Jarvis Landry been in the league for a little bit. Obviously spent time with Miami, Cleveland, and most recently last year with the Saints. Still a free agent. He's 30 years old, veteran, been in the league. The only thing with Jarvis Landry is he's a primary slot guy. The Jets, I would still say, would probably want maybe a guy that can play more on the outside. Because the Jets have McCole Harmon, who's slot, Randall Cobb, primary slot, and they also have Allen Lazard, who can also play in the slot. They don't need like a fourth slot receiver. They just don't. I think they're going to want a little bit more flexibility and maybe a guy that can play more on the outside. And that's why I bring up the name of Sammy Watkins. I understand first round, fourth overall pick, never lived up to the draft pick, played with Buffalo. We remember him as Jet fans, had one good season there, has never really panned out. Spent time in Baltimore, Buffalo, Kansas City, played 9 games last year in Green Bay. That's the only reason I'd go out and get a Sammy Watkins, because he played 9 games last year in Green Bay. He's also a veteran, same age as Jarvis Landry, can play more of the outside, and is a solid depth piece at receiver, and a veteran, and a guy that played with Rodgers. Also a guy that knows the system. If you're going to go out and make a trade, or if you're going to go out and sign a guy less than 3 weeks to go in the NFL, or the NFL until the NFL regular season begins, you're going to want to bring a guy in that knows the system and can jump right into practice and get ready. You're not going to want to bring a guy in that's got to spend a week learning the system, and the first 3-4 weeks of the season, he's overwhelmed and doesn't know what he's doing. That's the last thing you want. Bringing in a veteran that knows the system would be ideal. So Watkins could potentially be that guy. Played 9 games last year. Will play 12 games total between Baltimore and 9 with Green Bay. Is he a name? Again, but remember, though, we're not asking these guys to be the number 1 receiver. You're asking a Landry or a Sammy Watkins to be the 5th, 6th option. That's what you're asking them to do. So, I know people say, oh, why would you bring Sammy Watkins? He stinks. We're not asking Sammy Watkins to go out there and put up 1,500 yards this year. You're asking Sammy Watkins to go out there, be a rental placeholder, a veteran. That's all you're asking him to do. And he could potentially be an option. Again, same thing with the Jarvis Landry. Those are probably the 2 biggest names. You go deeper down the list. You have a guy. I think you have a couple other guys when you look deeper down the list. It's not, again, it's August 24th. There's not many free agents still available. And the reason, the 2 big names are, the biggest name is Julio Jones. Well, the reason he's available is because he's washed. I would not take a 34-year-old Julio Jones. I just wouldn't do it. I think you would actually get more out of Sammy Watkins and Jarvis Landry. I think they have more left in the tank than Julio Jones does. Julio Jones is just a big name at this point, not the same player. So, it'll be interesting. Jets could also strike another trade, maybe for a guy like a Michael Gallup. I saw somebody mention earlier another name out there. I forget exactly who it was, but there's some guy like a Michael Gallup I saw somebody mention, potentially good, physical, tough receiver. A Hunter Renfrow, I've seen some people say from the Raiders. I don't know if the Raiders would be willing to do that, especially if they're going to move on from Devontae Adams and trade Devontae Adams to you. I just don't know if the Raiders would do that, again, this early. I could see Gallup coming here. I could see the Jets maybe I could see Gallup being probably more realistic than Renfrow. But it's interesting. It's an interesting spot. I will tell you this, though. You got to trust Joe Douglas here, though, because, and I mean that in terms of, Joe Douglas last year when Breece Hall went down, and I understand this didn't work out. James Robinson didn't end up working out for the Jets. Various different reasons for that. You obviously had the offensive line was an issue. It seemed like he was dealing with a little bit of an injury. They didn't utilize him the right way. It was just a mess. The Jets' offense started to collapse. Nobody was playing well, really. The run game was bad. James Robinson wasn't very good. So it didn't end up working out. But you've got to give Joe Douglas credit for going out and making a move. And I mean that in that Sunday game, Week 7 against Denver. Breece Hall went down. The next day, Monday of the next day, less than 24 hours after the injury happened, Joe Douglas went out and traded for James Robinson. So I trust Joe Douglas in this situation. If he really feels there's a need at receiver, you trust that he's going to get a deal done soon. And remember, the Jets could potentially wait until next week. Roster cutdown day is Tuesday. That's the deadline to get your roster down to 53. They could wait. Every year, there are a couple surprising cuts every single season. Could the Jets potentially? I could see a world where a 4th, 5th receiver gets cut. A solid 4th, 5th receiver that's maybe better than any of the free agent options currently available that you could pick up. I could see that happening. So maybe the Jets wait and approach it that way and wait for somebody to become available on waivers and see if you can pick him up and add him to your 53. And as I mentioned earlier, the Jets like Xavier Gipson and Jason Brownlee a lot. They talked about drafting Jason Brownlee in the late rounds. So they might, two guys that have impressed during camp and preseason games. The Jets might feel confident in just holding those two guys as the 5th and 6th spot and maybe making a big splash move later in the season, or if things don't go well early on with the depth at receiver, maybe then that's when they make a go ahead and make a move for, maybe that's when they go ahead and make a big time move or something like that. But I think the whole Davante Adams thing, a lot of Jets fans have that ingrained in their head right now, and rightfully so. It's Davante Adams. But I think that's completely unrealistic with less than 3 weeks to go until the season starts. Well, really 2 weeks now, but you get what I'm saying when it comes to Monday Night Football. So if I had to guess, I think the Jets will pick up somebody. I don't know if it's going to, I don't think it's going to be the name of I don't think it's going to be somebody that is necessarily going to, like, I could see the Jets picking up somebody within the next couple days. Maybe not so much a guy that is like a Jarvis Landry or Sammy Watkins that's going to hold on to a roster, but maybe just somebody if they see something in him and potentially see something, maybe, see some sort of potential in him. I don't know if they'll go out and sign like a Watkins or a Landry or somebody like that, some of the bigger names on the market. I just don't think that happened, but it'll be interesting. It's going to be very interesting to see what the New York Jets do. I think, I do truly think deep down inside they like Xavier Gipson and Jason Brownlee a lot, and I think they trust those guys, and they also trust the 4 other guys in front of them. And that's Lazard, Garrett Wilson, McCole Harmon, and Randall Cobb. But again, the notion that the Jets receiving core is all of a sudden not good is just completely false. It's just false. And I understand maybe drops are a little bit of a concern, no doubt about it. But you've got Garrett Wilson. We don't have to talk about what Garrett Wilson brings to the table. He's a stud. You have Garrett Wilson. You have Randall Cobb and Lazard. I understand Randall Cobb's old, but 2 guys that have chemistry with Rodgers. And you have a guy in a red zone threat, 2 red zone threats. Cobb is good in the red zone and Lazard's good in the red zone. You have a veteran. And you have McCole Harmon, who was on his way to having a career year last year prior to injury, as I mentioned earlier. Like, let's just stop acting like McCole. We talked about McCole Harmon this offseason is how he's going to have a big role, he's going to have a big year, and now all of a sudden McCole Harmon's not any good. Like, that's just not true. It's just not true. But, as I mentioned, they are 1 injury away, and that's why I wouldn't be against bringing in somebody to have more insurance on the back end of that receiver rotation and in practice squad as well. So we'll see. We'll see what the Jets do, but certainly makes things a little bit interesting. So now we'll get into another story here in New York football, as the New York Giants today made a trade. And I got to admit, I love this trade if you're the New York Giants for a couple reasons. And I hate the trade if you're an Arizona Cardinals fan. It doesn't make much sense. I understand Isaiah Simmons hasn't quite lived up to the first-round pick that many expected, but he was a first-round. And I remember talking about Isaiah Simmons going into the draft, and I remember the Giants being one of the teams interested. And it was funny because I, as a Jet fan, actually potentially looked at him back in the 2020 draft. First-round pick. He was first-round pick, 8th overall. I look back on it, and I was always wondering if the Jets could potentially go out and grab him in terms of the draft, because I remember going through that draft, looking at linebacker as a need, and I thought potentially the Jets could go out and make a move. He plays safety, plays linebacker, that versatility. The Giants are another team that was interested, so it's funny to see he's been in the league now for 3 years, entering year number 4, and when both the Jets and the Giants, you looked at him at potential needs at linebacker, especially the Giants. Giants especially. I think actually if I look back at my mock draft, I probably had the Giants actually taking Isaiah Simmons because I thought he would go there. Obviously, that didn't end up happening. But it's funny now, 3 years later, entering year number 4, he goes to the Giants. I don't understand this move, though, from an Arizona Cardinals perspective. I understand it from a Giants perspective. They got Bobby Okereke in the offseason. Very good linebacker. Linebacker was a clear need. They've dealt with some injuries there, but to bring in a guy like an Isaiah Simmons into the Wink Martindale system is certainly intriguing. And they got him for a 2024 7th-round pick. So what the Arizona Cardinals basically did is they took a former first-round pick. And I understand, I know he hasn't had the best preseason in the world, and saw a story the other day that he had a lack of effort on one of the plays in the preseason game, and it didn't sit well with the organization, didn't sit well with the coaching staff. But to have a former first-round pick that it hasn't necessarily been bad. I wouldn't necessarily he's been a horrible first-round pick like he's been a bust. but he's shown some signs, but it hasn't been enough. He hasn't lived up to the first-round pick grade. I wouldn't say he's been terrible, but to only get a 7th-round pick for a guy with that much athleticism, for a guy that's only 25 entering year number 4, it's certainly interesting. It's an interesting move from a Cardinals perspective. Now, he's played 50 games in his 3 years with the Cardinals. He didn't miss a single game. Played every game from 2020, 2021, and 2022. He had 105 tackles in 2021, 99 tackles in 2022. Had 4 sacks last season, which was a career high. He's had 7 passes defended each of the last 2 years. He's shown some flashes. It hasn't been consistent enough. But you're interested to see what he can now do in the Wink Martindale system. But this is a steal for Giants because it's still a guy that you don't know how. It's a high risk, low reward. Because the low reward is, or it's a high risk, or it's a high, I apologize. It's a high reward. It's a low risk, high reward. I completely messed that up. I just said low reward. It's a high risk, or it's a high reward, low risk. Because the low risk is you gave up a 7th-round pick. If it doesn't work out, most likely that 7th-round pick's not going to turn anything anyway. And even if the Cardinals are in a terrible spot. They're a dumpster fire of an organization right now. So the low risk is you gave up a 7th-round pick. The high reward is you get a guy with a high ceiling. Isaiah Simmons is very athletic. He's versatile, can play safety, can play linebacker, was a former first-round pick for a reason. He's only been in the league for 3 years, still relatively young. You add him in the Wink Martindale defense. You see what he can do there. He's got some speed. Again, the athleticism is very high. Like, he's a guy that brings a lot of good traits to the table and a guy that the Giants were interested in him a couple years ago going into the 2020 NFL Draft. And a guy that has shown some flashes and a guy that I think his ceiling's high. We don't know. That's the issue with Isaiah Simmons. We don't know how low his floor is. But his ceiling's high because he's versatile and he's got athleticism. So I like this move for the New York Giants a lot. I was surprised to see this kind of come across today as one of these moves that kind of just pops up. It's not a big-time move. I'm not saying that the Giants are now going to make the Super Bowl, but it's a good move for the Giants, an interesting move from a Cardinals perspective. I understand it hasn't quite worked out. The 3 years there, he has not lived up to the first-round pick label. But to say that you still couldn't salvage him and at least make him into a quality linebacker, something obviously wasn't right there. To say that you can only get a 7th-round pick in return for a guy that has got a lot of good attributes, it seems like the only thing is he's got to be in the right place, a good place. Arizona's a dumpster fire, and you really start to wonder if the reason maybe he hasn't exactly lived up to the potential is because the Cardinals are in a terrible spot organization-wise. I mean, they have so many questions up and down that roster. And you wonder if Isaiah Simmons and his lack of development could be more of a coaching staff issue than actually Isaiah Simmons. And we'll get to see that. And this is a big chance for Isaiah Simmons because if he goes to the Giants and still isn't quite that player, then you'll understand. But it's a low-risk, high-reward for the Giants to give up a 7th-round pick for a guy that's got a lot of attributes, for a guy that's got a lot of talent, and you see if you can maximize it. So a really good under-the-radar move today for the Giants, especially with a team that, after last year, their linebackers were one of the biggest weaknesses with the team. You can't have enough of them at this point. And they've also dealt with some injuries, but you have Bobby Okereke. They've gone better. They get better here with this move. The New York Giants got better today with this move. I'll tell you that. Again, I don't think this moves, as I mentioned, this doesn't mean that they're going to be a Super Bowl team. But it certainly helps them in terms of their linebacker spot, and it gives them an exciting young piece to look forward to. And you see, again, the Giants continue this path of seeing what pieces fit, seeing what pieces don't fit, implementing guys into the Wink Martindale offense or the defense, and really getting to see if you can maximize some of this young talent that the New York Giants got in their roster. So quick move there. Quick thoughts on the New York Giants going out and getting Isaiah Simmons. So now I move on here to a little bit of hockey. As the New York Rangers yesterday made a move as the offseason continues to roll on, and they've done a lot this offseason. A busy offseason, especially for some of the young guys, with Keandre Miller signing an extension and now Alexi Lafreniere also signing an extension. So Alexi Lafreniere, a former first-round pick, or former first overall pick, I should say, from a couple years ago back in the 2020 NHL Draft, has officially signed an extension with the New York Rangers. So when you look at this New York Rangers offseason, before we get into the logistics of the move, I thought this is now a complete offseason. You went in with Keandre Miller needing a signing. You went in with Alexis Lafreniere needing extension. You do that to both guys. You go out, bring in some pieces in free agency. You bring in some defensemen. You bring in guys that the New York Rangers feel fit the Peter Laviolette plan, the Peter Laviolette system. And now you're getting ready here for the start of training camp in September. And obviously preseason and the start of the regular season coming up here in October. So the Alexis Lafreniere extension is a 2-year, $4.65 million extension. It's got $2.325 million AAV. So a very small extension. It's actually one of the smallest extensions we've ever seen from a first overall pick. And I'll give you some of the numbers. So AAV after their rookie seasons from first overall picks, Alexis Lafreniere is $2.3 million. When you look back on some of the other guys, well, Jack Hughes is making $8 million AAV. Connor McDavid's making $12.5 million AAV. Rasmus Dahlin, $6 million AAV. Nico Hischier, $7.3 million AAV. Aaron Ekblad, $7.5 million AAV. And shortly after this move was made, former first overall pick Austin Matthews is making now $11.6 million AAV. So after his newest extension with the Toronto Maple Leafs. So you look now, I believe it was a 4-year extension. When you look at it from an Alexis Lafreniere perspective and you look at who the Rangers went out and got in terms of the first overall pick, and when you look at how Alexis Lafreniere lines up against former first overall picks like Jack Hughes in the New Jersey Devils, Rasmus Dahlin, the Sabres, obviously Nico Hischier, obviously Austin Matthews, Connor McDavid, some of the big name guys there, he doesn't line up very well. His $2.3 million AAV is lower than all 6 of those guys that I just mentioned. And I think this contract, the biggest thing I take away from this contract is, number one, the Rangers needed to do this, right? You want to see Lafreniere continue to develop, hopefully develop. You want to see what Peter Laviolette and this new coaching staff can do. But I do think this should be, hopefully, a motivating factor for Alexis Lafreniere, because for a former first overall pick, for your first extension, for your first big contract payday, to be a 2-year, $4.6 million deal with $2.3 million in AAV is extremely disappointing. Part of it's Alexis Lafreniere. A lot of it is the New York Rangers and their lack of development on both Lafreniere and Kaapo Kakko, 2 guys that you hope to see produce at much higher levels here over these next couple seasons because of Peter Laviolette and hopefully the newly renovate, I guess, however you want to call it, coaching staff organization with Peter Laviolette coming in. Hopefully they can do a better job of incorporating this young talent, not just dropping them on the bottom lines and not giving them any power play opportunities, giving these guys more opportunities and letting these guys go out there and learn and get playing time and get consistent playing time and develop. And that's what you hope is the sign for this move, is that he will develop. The Rangers have a plan for him. And hopefully this is setting him up to get a bigger extension in the future once this 2-year deal is up. But Alexis Lafreniere hasn't done a whole lot in his first couple years of his NHL career. I mean, watching him, when you look at it, he's been very inconsistent. He's been a typical young player. Showed some flashes, a lot of growing pains. There's moments where you sit there and you're scratching your head. He hasn't lived up to the number 1 overall pick label. I don't know if he'll ever live up to the number 1 overall pick label. I don't know if he'll ever play like we all expected him to be when he came out of the draft and was a first overall pick. I don't know if he'll ever live up to that. There's a chance he isn't. But from a New York Rangers perspective, you extended him, and you've got to hope that over these next 2 years, especially with Peter Laviolette, you've got to hope that they incorporate him more and develop him and at least turn him into a very solid forward moving forward for this New York Ranger team. It's going to take a lot to get him to be the player that we all expect him to be. I don't know if he will ever be that guy. There's a chance he won't be. He certainly hasn't been. Part of that's him. Part of it's their organization. A lot of it's the organization, because they struggled to develop Kaapo Kakko up to this point as well. Both guys were well-respected picks amongst the fan base. It's not like the New York Rangers went out and got two guys that nobody thought were going to be any good that they took high in the draft. No. Kaapo Kakko, some thought would go number 1 overall ahead of Jack Hughes. He didn't. He went number 2. And a lot of people like Alexis Lafreniere, was the unanimous number 1 overall pick. So, again, these two guys have just struggled to develop in terms of player development from the New York Rangers side of things. And you hope that Peter Laviolette can give Alexis Lafreniere a lot more opportunities, a lot more developmental opportunities, more ice time, and the ability to grow and learn. Because he's shown flashes. It hasn't been consistent enough. Part of that development, we'll see if we see a lot of Alexis Lafreniere this year on the power play. He hasn't got much power play. I think he was like 7th on the Rangers in power play minutes last year. See if he can get a lot more opportunities on the power play. We'll see if the Rangers give him more power play opportunities, especially and maybe potentially if the whole postseason, seeing what he can do, which line, how exactly he lines up at the forward spot. But power play time, I think, is big because that's a lot of Rangers fans have been looking for Alexis Lafreniere to be on the power play, and he hasn't been a whole lot. Again, near the bottom of the team in terms of power play minutes. So an opportunity to get him on the power play a lot more and an opportunity to give him more opportunity to develop him more. Look, I mean, this is what he's done in his 3 years as a New York Ranger. He's had 91 points in 216 games played. He's had 91 points, 47 goals, 44 assists. That's 0.42 points per game. That's simply not good enough for a first overall pick. He played 56 games in year 1, 79 games in year 2, 81 games last year. So he's been out there, he's been available. 21, 31, 39 points each of the last 3 years. So he has increased each season in points, but he's yet to take that massive, massive jump, yet to take that big leap in terms of development from one of these years. First 3 seasons, we didn't see that big jump. We saw flashes, not enough. Now we'll see what he can do with this extension. And for Peter Laviolette, he's still only 21. He'll be 22 in October. For a Peter Laviolette, he's got his work cut out for him to develop Alexis Lafreniere and turn him into something. Whether he ever turns into the first overall pick that we expected or not, you've got to try and work with him. You've got to try and develop it, and you've got to get the most out of him. And I trust Laviolette. I trust him to put him in the right positions, give him the ice time that he needs, give him the opportunities that he needs, give him the power play opportunities, give him everything that you can to try and get the most out of Alexis Lafreniere and Kaapo Kakko as well, for that matter, 2 of the young guys on this Ranger team. So we'll see how it all plays out for the New York Rangers moving forward. So you got football season starting up. You got October baseball around the corner. You also got hockey, you got basketball. So, again, October, I think, is one of the greatest months in sports. Because you got October baseball, you've got basketball and hockey, and you got football. You got all 4 of the major sports going on. It's the only month of the year that happens. So, unless the World Series creeps into November. But it's the only month of the year that happens. So, we're right around the corner from the start of those things. So, that'll do it for an episode of the Bubbs on Sports podcast. Back tomorrow talking all things New York sports. If the Jets make any moves, we'll see. We'll either have a video or a live stream. Still deciding on what I'll do there. Either a video, just a regular video, or a live stream talking all things Jets. So either way, there will be content up on the page tomorrow, and stay tuned for that. So that'll do it for an episode of the Bubbs on Sports podcast. As always, hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.